Hello, Jordan. My name's Matthew Sands. I run a project called the Nations of Sanity project, and I am very keen to speak to you about it. Now, I understand that the list of people that would like to speak to you is a pretty long list, understandably so. So I thought perhaps making a video would help me stand out amongst the crowd a little bit. And just to let you know what the project is about, the Nations of Sanity project is built on the assertion that the only way to create a truly free society with truly equal rights is to establish the non-aggression principle as the law through a universal peace agreement. Essentially what we're saying is that crime should be can and should be objectively defined by this universal principle rather than be decided by the arbitrary dictates of ruling governments as it is today. I don't know how familiar you are with the non-aggression principle, but it's the moral principle that comes from the concept of self-ownership, which is just the idea that individuals have right and responsibility over only their own self. Now, I think you'll be kind of familiar with this concept to a certain degree, and you're obviously familiar with libertarianism, which often invokes the non-aggression principle as its kind of founding underlying philosophy. So I don't know exactly where you're going to stand on this idea. The reason why I would like to speak to you is because I think the true value of this idea is revealed the more that it's explored and scrutinized. There's certain aspects of it that I can imagine you being in quite agreement with, like the basic principle that people have right over themselves, and the implications that has to many things that I know are close to your heart, like freedom of speech, for example. But then again, there's other aspects of it that you may be very wary of. I know you're certainly wary of people that have ideas on how to change the world, and the anti-government, anti-establishment aspects of this idea, of this project, and of the ideology that it represents. The ideology being voluntarism, which is often associated with anarchism, although anarchism is a word that gets a bit of a bad rap. Voluntarism is anarchism in the sense that anarchism is about no rulers, and voluntarism is also about no rulers. It's a little bit more specific about the reason why it opposes rulers is because people have right over only themselves. And this is one of the reasons why this idea of establishing the non-aggression principle as the law is to be done through a universal peace agreement, because ruling authorities would be illegal if the non-aggression principle was the law. So it would obviously be a contradiction to establish this law through a ruling authority. So the idea is to establish this universal law through a universal peace agreement. So we basically establish it as the terms of peace between all people. So it's not the law because anyone has the authority to say that it's the law, but it is actually the law because on a societal level, we have established this basic principle and this understanding that every individual has right and responsibility over only their own self. And basically my argument is that if we accept the concept of self-ownership, that everyone has right over only their own self, which is a pretty difficult concept to oppose in my opinion. If we accept this concept, then everything else that I'm laying out with the Nations of Sanity is basically undeniable and pretty much self-evident, because if we accept the concept of self-ownership, then the non-aggression principle is an objective standard of morality based on that concept that is providing us an objective definition of crime. And once we identify that the non-aggression principle is the only justifiably enforceable standard of law that we can establish, then it becomes self-evident that we should establish it as the law. And as I say, the fact that it cannot be established without contradiction through a ruling government or any other ruling authority, it has to be established as the law through a universal peace agreement. One other little detail about this idea is the peace agreement that we present is a three-part peace agreement. And just to run through that very quickly, the three parts break down as this. Part one is the basic agreement to make the non-aggression principle the law. Part two is called lines in the sand, and this is where we set limits of tolerance over differing interpretations, basically separating the black and white from the grey areas. The black and white being what we can enforce as part of this universal law on everybody, the grey areas being what we cannot enforce as part of this universal law, and that's something where standards would have to be negotiated within voluntary agreements and voluntary collectives. Anyway, I won't say much more about it. I have a website, Facebook page and a YouTube channel, all called the Nations of Sanity, and I hope if you have the time and inclination you'll check it out and give serious consideration to my invitation to have a conversation about this. I don't know how much of this idea has resonated with you so far, but I do sincerely believe that the true value of it will be revealed the more you explore and scrutinize this idea. If this is a bad idea for whatever reason, then I think someone like you would be well equipped to help me see why it's a bad idea. And if it's a good idea, then obviously it's something that needs to be considered by people like you and scrutinized and explored and perhaps polished and improved upon. So please consider my invitation to discuss. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your work and your own efforts to try to make the world a better place. And I hope you will take the time to speak to me about my own ideas and my own efforts to do that very same thing. Thank you very much.